In 1789, the world witnessed the French Revolution, an event that seemed unimaginable at the time. This revolution stood out in the late 18th century because it introduced modern revolutionary methods, dismantling the old system violently and replacing it with one founded on egalitarian and ideological values, rather than traditions or historical legitimacy. The French Revolution sent shockwaves across Europe, prompting nations to unite against this revolutionary abomination. Amid this chaos, an Irish statesman and philosopher closely observed the unfolding events and began documenting his thoughts. This man was none other than Edmund Burke. In 1790, Burke published his magnum opus, Reflections on the Revolution in France. This work is hailed as one of the most significant pieces of literature in the traditional conservative realm, and is often considered the counter-revolutionary manifesto. In it, Burke not only critiques the French Revolution, but also challenges the entire notion of revolutionary states. Burke observed that the states could be categorized in two distinct ways, a perspective uncommonly discussed in contemporary political discourse. He identified the organic state, one that evolves naturally over time, guided by tradition, inherited rights, and gradual reform, emphasizing continuity, stability, and generational wisdom. In contrast, he described the revolutionary state, one founded on ideology and abstract principles rather than tradition and gradual development, characterized by abrupt, extensive changes driven by the desire to rapidly implement theoretical ideals. In his work, Reflections on the Revolution in France, Burke argued that revolutionary states are inherently unsustainable and inferior to organic states. He wrote extensively on this topic, comparing the two and asserting that revolutionary states are destined to fail eventually. According to Burke, revolutionary leaders are driven by destructive principles that pose a constant threat to any form of stable government. Quote, "They are, therefore, not only the most inconsistent, but the most dangerous of all politicians, and the same principles which have inspired them to subvert the state of their country will inspire them, when they have ruined it, to dethrone the monarch and to depose the magistrate." Burke passed away in 1797, but I would say his writings remain significant today. He only witnessed revolutionary republicanism based on egalitarian values, but after his death, revolutionary fervor surged, particularly with the rise of ideologies like communism and fascism, which aimed to control every aspect of the state under their ideological dominance. With this new wealth of examples and incidents at our disposal, let's examine whether Burke's arguments have stood the test of time and if revolutionary states are indeed destined to fail eventually. Nations are fundamentally shaped by their foundations, which serve as the literal roots of the country. These foundations not only legitimize the authority of the rulers, but also define the principles and values the country upholds. The foundational principles of an organic state emphasize the importance of preserving traditions and culture to maintain societal stability and continuity. Society is seen not merely as a temporary arrangement for mutual benefit, but as a profound partnership that spans generations, including the living, the deceased, and those yet to be born. This intergenerational contract is vital for preserving the state's moral and cultural fabric. Traditions, customs, and established institutions represent the collective wisdom of past generations, providing a stable foundation for societal growth and progress. Neglecting these elements in favor of drastic changes can destabilize the very structures that have supported the success of civilization. Burke believed that true liberty and rational freedom are best preserved when viewed as inherited values rather than abstract rights. By treating liberties as part of a noble inheritance, society can balance freedom with responsibility and respect for tradition. This approach fosters a sense of dignity and continuity, preventing the emergence of quote-unquote upstart insolence that can accompany new, unanchored freedoms. Burke would state, quote, "Our liberty becomes something noble and impressive. It has a long history and respected ancestors. It has symbols and emblems, portraits, monuments, records, and titles. We respect our civil institutions just like we respect individual people, because of their age and their heritage. No amount of clever arguments can create a better way to maintain a rational and strong freedom than the path we have followed. We rely on our natural instincts and heartfelt beliefs rather than abstract ideas to protect our rights and privileges. What then are the foundational principles of a revolutionary state? These states are built on the rejection of established traditions and the pursuit of radical changes inspired by abstract ideals. Unlike the organic state, which values the continuity and wisdom of past generations, a revolutionary state seeks to break completely from historical precedents, viewing them as oppressive or outdated. It destabilizes society by dismantling existing social and political structures without a clear and practical vision for their replacements. This often leads to continuous upheaval and experimentation, driven by the shifting passions and ambitions of those in power, rather than by a thoughtful and lasting framework for governance. This is precisely the problem. The foundations of a revolutionary state are rooted in ideology rather than culture and traditions. Because these foundations rest on abstract principles, the revolutionary state tends to be far more oppressive. To secure its existence, it must conform the entire population to its ideological perspective. Gaetano Mosca, the founder of the Italian elite theory, realized something similar when examining the divine right of kings and the notion of the will of the people. According to Mosca, the idea of the will of the people suggests that government decisions reflect what all the people want, a concept that comes from Enlightenment thinking. He argues that this idea is clearly false because it's impossible for a government to truly represent everyone's wishes. Unlike the belief in divine right, which claims rulers are chosen by God and is based on faith, the will of the people is supposed to be rational and based on reason. However, because it isn't practical or true, believing in it often leads to real-world problems and violence. In contrast, supernatural beliefs like divine right don't usually cause such direct and practical issues. For this reason, revolutionary ideologies strive to control every aspect of society. Positions of power are awarded based on ideological loyalty rather than merit. Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany are prime examples. Both Hitler and Mussolini aimed to politicize the administrative apparatus and the military. Every child was expected to join the Hitler Youth to be ideologically indoctrinated and show blind loyalty to the Nazi party. Similarly, in Italy, one could not even become a teacher unless they were a member of the fascist party. The reason a revolutionary state must control every aspect of society lies in the inherent instability of relying solely on ideology. Unlike tradition and culture, ideology lacks deep, time-tested connections to human experience that unite people through shared history and identity. Ideologies are often built on abstract principles and theoretical frameworks that promise perfect outcomes but don't account for the complexities and often contradictory nature of human society. Because these ideologies are based on idealized visions rather than real-life experiences, they are easily disrupted by practical challenges. To maintain power, the state must enforce uniformity and suppress dissent, making sure that everyone and every institution strictly follows the ideological doctrine. Unlike organic states that gain stability from a diverse and adaptable cultural heritage, the revolutionary state must constantly justify its existence through strict and unwavering adherence to its founding principles. Any deviation or challenge to the ideology is viewed as a threat to its existence, prompting immediate and often draconian responses. A notable example is the rise of Stalin in the Soviet Union. When Lenin died, not all Bolsheviks agreed on how the USSR should be run, and this pretty much caused a split in the party, which could have engulfed the Soviet Union in a state of civil war. For this reason, Stalin exiled Leon Trotsky and executed Nikolai Bukharin, and tried to eradicate any form of factionalism in the infamous Moscow trials and Great Purge, where an estimated 700,000 to 1.2 million political opponents were executed to solidify Stalin's grip on power. Julius Evola, in his essays on the Third Reich, pointed out that Nazi Germany could only be stable insofar as Hitler was alive. If Hitler was taken out of the picture, the entire National Socialist apparatus would start falling apart, as it was not a system designed to last in the long term. Quote, naturally, in a system gravitating to this degree around a Führer like the Third Reich, a stable future was not conceivable. Constitutionally, it was possible to have a type of tribunate of the people. In reality, however, had the war not ended in military defeat, a vacuum would have appeared after Hitler's death, since it would not have been possible to bring to power, in a continuing succession, men possessing Hitler's exceptional individual qualities, which alone assured him power and made him the system's center of gravity. The Führerstaat would necessarily have to yield to a different order. As long as Hitler lived and fortune was on his side, his galvanizing power succeeded in holding everything together and inspiring unbelievable achievements up to the last hour, up to the edge of the abyss. The complete ideological collapse of Germany after 1945, however, when that tension failed, not comparable to the one that followed its defeat in the First World War, shows how superficial was the effect of his magnetic action on the masses in spite of the power of myths and a strict totalitarian organization. Another interesting example is the Spanish Civil War. One of the main reasons the nationalists managed to win the conflict is that, despite often having differing ideologies, they were united by a shared Spanish identity, Catholic faith, and a strong commitment to tradition. In contrast, the Spanish Republicans were held together only by ideology. With liberal Democrats, communists, and anarchists all part of the Popular Front, their alliance was inherently unstable. This ideological diversity led to significant infighting among the Republicans, preventing them from uniting as effectively as the nationalists, ultimately leading to their defeat. I would like to end this section with a quote from Wilhelm II, a quote most of us are probably familiar with, but with this perspective I have given, this quote takes on a whole new layer of meaning. When the topic of Adolf Hitler came up, this is what Wilhelm had to say in an interview with Ken magazine. Quote, there is a man alone, without family, without children, without God. He builds legions, but he doesn't build a nation. A nation is created by families, a religion, tradition. It is made up out of the hearts of mothers, the wisdom of fathers, the joy and exuberance of children. Germany under him has become an all-swallowing state, disdainful of human dignities and the ancient structures of our race, sets itself up in place of everything else. And the man who, alone, incorporates in himself this whole state, has neither a god to honor, nor a dynasty to conserve, nor a past to consult. This man could bring home victories to our people each year without bringing them glory. But of our Germany, which was a nation of poets and musicians and artists and soldiers, he has made a nation of hysterics and hermits, engulfed in a mob and led by 1,000 liars or fanatics. The concept of revolution exists because revolutionaries seek to enact significant change, viewing the status quo as inefficient. To achieve this, they aim to dismantle the old system quickly and ruthlessly, implementing their vision as swiftly and brutally as possible. They argue that change through traditional means is too slow, if it even happens at all, and believe that taking up arms and seizing power is the only way to bring about the necessary transformation. While there is some truth to this perspective, there is also a good reason why change in organic states occurs gradually over many years. Organic states perceive change and progress as a gradual and evolutionary process, deeply rooted in respect for established traditions and cultural continuity. Change, in this context, is not about overturning the past, but about refining and improving it in ways that are consistent with long-standing principles and practices. Progress in an organic state is therefore not defined by whether the state will allow men to take it up the ass or allow children to change their gender, but about harmonizing innovation with tradition. True reform is not the wholesale adoption of new ideologies, but the thoughtful adaptation of time-tested values to contemporary circumstances. This kind of approach ensures that societal advancements do not come at the expense of cultural identity and historical continuity, as Burke would write. Quote, Thus, by preserving the method of nature in the conduct of the state, in what we improve we are never wholly new, in what we retain we are never wholly obsolete. By adhering in this manner and on those principles to our forefathers, we are guided not by superstition of antiquarians, but by the spirit of philosophic analogy. Austria-Hungary stands as a prime example of organic progress and change, embodying the principles of gradual evolution and respect for tradition. Throughout its history, the Austrian Empire maintained a complex but stable political structure that integrated diverse ethnic groups under the monarchy. Reforms were introduced carefully and incrementally, addressing current needs without disrupting the established cultural and political order. And this modernization did not come at the expense of social stability. The empire never had to go through a violent revolution, nor did it remain static. New technology and even a few new ideas were adopted without harming the organic and traditional foundations the empire rested on. The revolutionary state, on the other hand, perceives change as an urgent and fundamental necessity. Their vision is driven by a belief in the power of radical reformation to achieve a more just and equitable society. Revolutionaries see change as a means to overthrow existing structures and replace them with new systems based on ideological principles as fast as possible. But this approach, while it may usher in these changes revolutionaries aim to achieve, it will also have many disastrous consequences. Such an approach disrupts the established order abruptly, creating a vacuum that can be filled with chaos and conflict, and it often leads to the dismantling of essential structures. The sudden implementation of untested and abstract principles can result in a breakdown of law and order, as existing norms and institutions are swept away without adequate replacements. This creates an environment of uncertainty and fear, where individuals and communities struggle to adapt to the rapid changes imposed upon them. Moreover, the instability caused by a revolutionary change is often long-lasting. The implementation of new ideas without careful consideration and testing can lead to systemic failures. Remember, revolutionary states are built on ideological grounds and idealized visions. As these ideas fail to deliver the expected outcomes, the society remains in a state of perpetual turmoil, unable to establish a stable and functioning order. And such drastic changes can prevent the development of robust institutions and enduring social norms, making it difficult for stability to return over time. As Burke would note on the French Assembly, quote, "The difficulties, which they rather had eluded than escaped, meet them again in their course. They multiply and thicken on them. They are involved, through a labyrinth of confused detail, in an industry without limit and without direction, and, in conclusion, the whole of their work becomes feeble, vicious, and insecure." It is this inability to wrestle with difficulty which has obligated the Arbitrary Assembly of France to commence their schemes of reform with abolition and total destruction. But is it in destroying and pulling down that skill is displayed? Your mob can do this well, at least as your assemblies. The shallowest understanding, the rudest hand is more than equal to that task. Rage and frenzy will pull down more in half an hour than prudence, deliberation, and foresight can build up in 100 years. There is no better example of this than the infamous Arab Spring. While revolutionaries succeeded in toppling the status quo, their alternatives have shown little sign of improving the situation. Revolutionary republics such as Syria, Yemen, and Libya remain in constant political and societal turmoil. In contrast, the only countries in the Arab world that are stable and even thriving economically are the organic monarchies. Olle Scherling, in a study on the impact of the Arab Spring, had this to say, quote, "According to Hypfair, dissatisfaction as connected to socio-economic issues and a strained relationship between the elites and the general population are the causes of the uprisings, whereas political instability and revolutionary war within the post-Arab Spring scenario are consequences of a failed transition into democracy. Out of the 6 countries that were the most affected by the Arab Spring, only Tunisia achieved political stability and democratization in the long term, whereas the attempted transition in, for example, Syria, Libya, and Yemen resulted in civil war and societal disorder." Still, revolutionaries do have a point. Reform can be exhausting and can take years to accomplish. Why reform gradually when change could happen overnight? However, it is precisely this organic approach to reform that tends to be more stable and advantageous in the long run. Burke actually has a section where he entertains that thought. Quote, "But you may object, a process of this kind is slow. It is not fit for an assembly which glories in performing in a few months the work of ages. Such a mode of reforming, possibly, might take up many years. Without question, it might, and it ought. It is one of the excellencies of a method in which time is amongst the assistants, that its operation is slow and, in some cases, almost imperceptible." Dr. David Armstrong would also observe something similar in a study titled Revolution and World Order. He would write in the conclusion regarding revolutionary states, quote, "Almost by definition, such states have been disturbers of stability and regularity in many existing patterns of things, but they have posed a particular challenge to the underlying set of assumptions, rules, and practices by which the society of states has conducted its affairs. An orderly society is not one that permits no change, but one possessing recognized procedures for change that are seen to be effective by its members, but demands for change that go far beyond the established consensus as to the acceptable boundaries of change can have profoundly disorderly consequences. If caution and patience are recommended when painting or sculpting a statue, they surely become a duty when the subjects are sentient beings. Sudden changes in their state, condition, and habits can cause immense suffering. Political arrangements aimed at social goals should be achieved through social means. Minds must work together, and time is needed to create that unity of minds. Patience will always accomplish more than force. As Burke would state, quote, "By a slow but well-sustained progress, the effect of each step is watched. The good or ill success of the first gives light to us in the second, and so, from light to light, we are conducted with safety through the whole series. We see that the parts of the system do not clash. The evils latent in the most promising contrivances are provided for as they arise. One advantage is, as little as possible, sacrificed to another. We compensate, we reconcile, we balance." Considering everything we have talked about, it becomes clear why revolutionary states are not the kind of states that will last, and at some point will inevitably fail. Revolutionary states are destined to fail due to their inherent instability and reliance on untested ideological principles. These states implement radical changes without regard for the existing social and political structures that provide stability and continuity, and the only way for them to sustain themselves is through brutal and oppressive means. If those means are taken away, the system would almost undoubtedly fall apart. It's no coincidence that when Mikhail Gorbachev started reforming the USSR and pulling back its more oppressive aspects, the Union completely dissolved and collapsed. When revolutionary states do decide to take a different approach and start reforming, because their foundation is rooted in ideology, they need to claim that their interpretation is the rightful one, while the other is full of filthy revisionists. This is what happened with Stalin as he purged the Trotskyists and the Bukharinists, and when Stalin died, Nikita Khrushchev started doing the same thing with Stalinists. And to this day, this almost pointless bickering over ideological doctrines continues among communists. Trotskyists, Stalinists, Leninists, Khrushchevites, and all other ists fight on who has the purest form of Bolshevism and who are the filthy revisionists who are betraying the revolution. It acts almost like a cult. British political scientist Archie Brown points towards communist Afghanistan, how ideological infighting got so bad everyone had lost faith in the communist system. Quote, "The Afghan regime, though led by people who regarded themselves as communists, had certainly not succeeded in creating a communist system prior to the Soviet invasion, and it was, if anything, even less successful in doing so after it. Normally, a communist party, after coming to power, was able to increase party membership massively. In Afghanistan, as a leading specialist on the conflict has observed, it would have taken a miracle to resurrect Afghan communism, because the latest round of factional infighting had destroyed most party members' belief in the building of a communist party as a viable project." The establishment, or to be exact, the re-establishment of an organic form of governance, is something conservatives should aim towards, and this is something conservatives need to remember. We should minimize ideological biases that could cloud our understanding of what is quote-unquote normal, and look towards the past and tradition for guidance, not to remain static as some people believe. Conservatism is not necessarily a political system or an ideology, but rather a way of looking at the civil social order. It is a form of social consciousness, a way of regarding the civil social order that is both a necessity for human flourishing and a means of maintaining social stability. This mindset requires us to free ourselves from ideological distortions, which, sadly, many young people have adopted. They justify the destruction that has occurred by believing it was necessary for progress, convincing themselves that they are fighting for a new future rather than defending established truths. These truths, though they may appear in various forms, have always underpinned effective social and political systems, and when we get accused of being reactionaries because of this, remember these words from Evola. Quote, "Young people should dismiss these modern fads and stand firm against those who label them as being on the wrong side of history or reactionaries. History is not a predestined force that moves on its own, it's shaped by human actions. The concept of being progressive often promotes passivity, encouraging people to accept without question a tide that is pulling society downwards. When accused of being reactionary, the response should be a question. As things are being destroyed and degraded, should we simply watch passively or even applaud? The term reactionary is not adequate because our stance is based on positive foundational values. We stand for what is real and enduring, not reliant on any hypothetical future promises."